Wrath of Angels. Chapter 6, Scene 4. The Fallen Commander. Aboard the Wrath of Angels. Interrogation Sanctum and Chart Hall. 9 months, 3 days, after extraction from Caridon. Month 7, year 261. The 41st millennium. They dragged him through the wrath by the chain around his throat. No one spoke. The ship did. The arteries of the battle barge murmured with old hymns heard as vibration rather than sound, a deep bell hum in the metal ribs. Bulkheads watched with their scabbed paint and stamped sigils, sanctified 100 times and rubbed by 1,000 gauntlets. The prisoner's boots left a thin slug trail of blood along the gratings. Where it dribbled into the deck plate seams it steamed, as if the wrath preferred not to be stained. The procession passed beneath votive lamps and purity seals, shriveled by engine heat. The oathbound walked at the core like a carried answer. Dominiel ahead, Lutharion and Ramiel flanking the captive with shields low, Abriath a quiet scissor of motion in the rear, blade sheathed yet ready. Varicon and the remnants of the Emerald Vow followed in 2 thin files, banner furled now and bound with a strap of leather cut from Malvin's own harness. Ephraim limped, blood seeping dark from the knife still seated in his thigh. Every step was a prayer forced through gritted teeth. Torvain's gauntlets were black with soot and someone else's jaw. Jorath kept his muzzle down and his breath level, because Garen had told him once that fear had a taste, and to spit it out before it curdled. A watcher in silence shuffled along the wall at elbow height, as if the bulkhead itself had budded a familiar. It kept pace without touching, lopsided and patient. The prisoner glanced at it once, the good eye narrowed. Something like recognition crossed the broken mouth and then went away. They brought him to the sanctum cell. The door was a slab of iron quarried from some fortress world's old pride, its face a garden of studs and rivets and warning sigils. Hexagrammic wards were inlaid a finger deep, bright metal on black, lines so old that oil had seeped into them and made their shapes look wet. 4 great rings hung slack in sockets, meant for giant hands. Candles guttered in little alcoves around the frame. Their tears had pooled and cooled into white cataracts. Dominiel's knuckles rapped once. The door's latches unthought their engagement. Within, darkness was not the air's absence of light, but a choice the room had made for itself. They pulled the chain, and the prisoner stumbled inside. He went to his knees because the collar weighted him there, and because Lutharion put a hand to the back of his head and taught him the idea of the floor again. Ceramite rasped stone. The chamber breathed, cold and slow. In the far wall, a bronze grille showed a wedge of chapel beyond, an altar stone black as winter sky, a brazier whose coals never died, a rack of censers as ancient as error. "Remove his helm," Dominiel said. It took both of Ramiel's hands to break the seals. Zephynis's dent had crushed one side in, and when the helm came away, it took hair and skin with it like a scab. The face beneath had the pallor of a man already traveling. The left eye was a raw bead in a cratered socket. The right glared with an energy that had learned contempt as a habit so old it looked like belief. There was a smudge of dried blood on the cheek, where a gauntlet had disagreed with his bone structure. He spat red to clear his teeth. "Is this confession?" he asked mildly, "or theatre?" "Both," said a new voice, and the dark learned edges. Interrogator-Chaplain Melchizedek stepped through the side door with a small procession of censers and a single servo skull that had traded its jaw for an incense cup. His helm was off, his skull bare, his face the color of old iron, crisscrossed by little white sutures where discipline had left mementos. His armor bore scripture engraved till the letters had softened across centuries of polish. His crozius hung from his fist and gave off a thin, controlled light. It was not warp fire. It was the ship consenting to be a star for a while, in the hand of a man it trusted. The oathbound made room by not moving. The chaplain came to a halt 2 paces from the captive and regarded him with the kind of attention a craftsman spares a tool before he uses it, and again after. He turned the Crozius head a fraction, and the shadows took a step back. "Name," Melchizedek said. The prisoner smiled. It was a competent, ugly smile. "You first, confessor." "You know mine," Melchizedek replied, not contemptuous, only tired of the shape of this dance. "Your name." "Names are the thinnest chains." The prisoner rolled his shoulder against the collar until the ring creaked. "I was taught never to leave one where an enemy could pick it up and throw it." "Then I will call you witness," Melchizedek decided. "You came unasked to our house and saw what you were not meant to see. You will testify correctly." He raised his Crozius and made the sign in the air between them, not a benediction, but a geometry of jurisdiction. "You are under my hand." Witness chuckled once, and it grated like a file. "You wear our colors on your bones," he said. "We wear them on our hearts." Dominiel shifted his weight. The chain on his belt clinked. He did not speak. Melchizedek let the silence stand. He walked a small circle, the servo skull bobbing after him, trailing good smoke. His mouth moved. The words he spoke were soft, not quite voiced. They were for the room's benefit. The wards woke a little. Runes sank and rose like a slow tide. The prisoner's lip twitched. "We are not your enemy," Witness said. "We are your father's oath without the compromises you have taught it to make. You boarded one of ours and killed 4 of our sons who had done you no injury," Melchizedek said. "If that is fatherhood, it is the kind that plants its sons in shallow graves so it can see the tops of their heads and feel taller." Witness lifted his chin. "We killed those who serve a ghost. We killed to keep something unspoiled. What you call oath, we call silence under a lie." Romeel's fingers tightened on his mace. The chaplain lifted one finger almost lazily, and the pressure in the room fell back to where it belonged. "Your justifications are interesting," Melchizedek observed. "They are not required." He stood over the kneeling man. The Crozius teeth hummed. "You will name your cell. You will name your haven. You will name your patron. You will tell me how many wear the stolen green and how many wear bone. You will say where you met the ones who taught you the inversion. If you lie, I will know. If you are silent, I will make a space in you that wants to be filled by answers." Witness breathed through his nose and smiled with one corner of his mouth, the side unbruised by Zephynis. "You are late, priest. The true sons are already moving." "Then your words are of little value," Melchizedek said. "We shall see if your other parts are more reliable." He addressed the room without turning his head. "Seal." The sanctum obeyed. The door's inner bars slotted into stone with a pleasing, lethal finality. The candles guttered once more and steadied into a slow, eager burn. The servo skull tilted its bowl and spilled a caterpillar of smoke that smelt of sanctified oils, bone, and regret. Melchizedek set the head of the Crozius on the prisoner's shoulder and pressed until the teeth bit. A little light leaked like milk under the edge of the weapon. Flesh sizzled and then stopped protesting. Witness stared ahead until he needed to breathe again. When the breath arrived, he rode it without sound. "Good," Melchizedek said. "We may yet be honest with each other." He began the litanies of penance. His voice did not rise. He did not declaim. He spoke as if teaching a child letters, patient and absolute. "I name your sins," he said, and listed them without heat. "Murder, unconfessed. Theft, of colors and signs. Schism, gladly chosen. Blasphemy, hidden as piety, Cowardice, master's prudence. Pride, named as conscience. With each word he pressed the crozius a fraction, then lifted it, then pressed again a hand's width lower, and each time the weapon consented to say a small, clear yes. The oathbound watched. Ramiel's lips moved with the litany, a half-second behind, as if learning it again, even though every line lived in him with its own heartbeat. Lutharian stood as if he were carved from what stone wanted to be. Abriath looked where the crozius touched, and then where it would touch, and then at the prisoner's eyes. Dominiel's gaze did not move from the interrogator's hand. Witness's answers came like rust flaking off old iron. At first they were brittle jokes. Pride, he hissed and smiled. We were ordered to remove a cancer. We obeyed. Your silence is the tumor. He swallowed blood when the crozius pressed into the meat of his shoulder, and flinched only when Malkadek found the place where a man's breath catches whether he wishes it to or not. Cowardice, he said, breathing hard, is to dress obedience in new words and call it a different oath. Tell me where you learned those words, Malkadek said. The crozius hummed. Tell me who taught you to pronounce them so sincerely that you mistook sincerity for truth. A laugh cracked and broke. We taught ourselves. We watched your mouths move. We saw how often you chose the quiet path when the straight one crossed it. We chose differently. The chaplain changed tools. He set the crozius aside, resting it with care on the floor as if it were a reliquary in a friend's chapel, and drew out something humbler, a coil of black cable with a spiked bud at one end, and a prayer printed along its length. The letters rubbed soft with use. He wrapped it around the prisoner's forearm and tightened until the little thorns found skin and the skin consented. These are not instruments of cruelty, Malkadek said conversationally. They are instruments of vocabulary. The body learns faster than the mouth, but sooner or later the lesson travels. He pulled. The cable bit. The spikes flexed and bit again. Witness's breath left him in a sound like a bench groaning under too much weight. The chaplain held the tension for a count of thrice 9 heartbeats, murmuring a catechism about the weight of words, the weight of deeds, the weight of silence. When he released the pressure, blood came up in little beads, like a rosary strung badly. Your haven, Malkadek said, in the same tone one might use to ask a nephew which book he had taken without permission. Witness swallowed until his throat remembered how. I will tell you a thing, he whispered. Not the one you want, but one that will make you understand why the one you want is none of your business. Ramiel shifted. Lutharian did not. Abriath's eyelids lowered for the length of a blink and came back up. Speak, Malkadek invited. The oath we keep, Witness said, was written before yours learned to lie to itself. We did not fall. He bared his teeth so the blood could run more cleanly. We refused to kneel. Malkadek's mouth turned an angle that could have been pity if the man had been built for it. Kneeling is a posture, he said. Oath is a direction. He set his palm on the prisoner's sternum and leaned, not cruelly, only enough to ask the bone to be more honest. He changed tools again, back to the crozius. Not the teeth this time, the haft. He slid the butt into the collar ring and lifted until the ring carried weight, and the vertebrae under it asked questions to which only Malkadek had answers. The chaplain spoke then not to the prisoner, but to the ship, old words, the litany of the mask removed, a sequence of sounds that made the sanctum's wards stand up straighter and put their shoulders back. The room brightened by a shade that was not light. Witness fought a breath and lost. You, he managed and stopped. Your haven, Malkadek said again, as if they were still at the beginning of a polite conversation and had time to do this well. The man in chains rolled his head to put the good eye on Dominiel. "The knight," he said hoarsely. "Who struck me? Did he die with his teeth bared on purpose, or because he did not know he had no teeth?" Dominiel did not answer. He was not asked to. "Your haven," Melchizedek repeated. He increased the lift a fraction. The spine obliged. The voice box learned clarity under pressure. "Do you remember?" Witness whispered. "When we hunted together? When the color on our shoulders meant one thing?" He forced the words through a throat that wanted to make a noise instead. "We wear it for that memory. You wear it for the permission it buys." The chaplain's patience did not alter. "You will give me a place," he said. "A system, a name, a mark on a chart. We will go there and find the source that whispers platitudes into men who mistake their own voices for the lion's." The prisoner's mouth twitched. "He does not speak," he said almost gently. "That is what terrifies you." The cable bit again as Melchizedek turned his wrist. The servo skull jetted a thread of smoke that coiled and did not dissipate. Witness's silence became the sort of silence that has in it the sound of something trying to be born. "Say the name," Melchizedek said, and his tone was no longer conversational but simply true. The man took a long breath that might have been laughter if it had not carried the sound of something tearing. "Vardath," he said, surprising himself by saying it. The word came out soft, like a pet held in secret too long. He blinked, realized, laughed once. "I should not have given you a real one," he added weakly. "Bad discipline." Everything in the room leaned toward that syllable without changing position. It hung between men like a coin balanced on an edge. Melchizedek looked at Abriath. The knight inclined his head once, tiny as an eyelid move. He had the intangible habit of knowing star charts in a way that made navigation servitors resentful. The name meant not much. It would mean more when he made it. "Again," Melchizedek said to the prisoner softly, "because mouths do strange things under stress, and one should check that the world had not misheard." "Vardath," Witness repeated, and smiled into the pain this time to own it. A little blood trickle ran from the corner of the good eye, where tiny vessels had decided to be dramatic. "When you go there," he said, "your silence will be a shout in the wrong language." "Directions," Melchizedek said. "Rimward of the perdition reach by 6 days in a good wake," Witness murmured, and then, in defiance of his own wisdom, "There is a beacon, old, a ruin with a throat. Follow the broken note." The chaplain eased the haft from the collar ring. He allowed the spine to remember work. He stepped back a fraction, not kindness, only calibration. He watched the prisoner's breath for the counting of a rosary. The pattern returned, ragged. The man looked very tired. "Thank you," Melchizedek said sincerely, "because gratitude is a habit you don't unlearn without losing something worth keeping." Witness's head lolled toward the watcher. "Do you teach it to follow you?" he asked conversationally. "Or does it come when it smells the idea of death?" The watcher blinked, or seemed to, as if the candle behind it had flickered. Melchizedek returned the crozius to his fist, in a movement that put new interpretation to the word inevitable. "You have done your part," he said. "What remains is the answer to a smaller question." Witness coughed, and the cough had old coins in it. "Ask." "When you put on the color," Melchizedek asked, "did you expect it to vanish the first time a brother looked you in the eye and named it theft?" The man smiled with both corners of his mouth this time. "I expected your anger," he said. "I did not expect your sorrow. That is why it had to be done." Melchizedek inclined his head, a bow to an enemy who had allied himself with an honest mistake. "Then we are finished." He spoke the last part of the litanies, the sequences that have nothing to do with salvation and everything to do with refusal. The Crozius teeth touched the prisoner's breastbone and pushed slow until they found the little hollow above the heart and filled it. The light was small and correct. It did no more than was required. Witness watched it come and did not look away. He began to laugh. It was not the sound of defiance. It was the sound a man makes when the thing that has been waiting behind his tongue for years finally pushes through and sees itself. "You will go there," he said, between the little barks that were no longer laughter. "And it will open you like a—" He lost the thread, found it again. "You will hear the note, and you will think the music is yours." Dominiel took one step closer. Zephynis's helm, scoured clean, lay on the altar beyond the grill like a tremor caught and stilled. The oathbound smelled brass and ash. Melchizedek pressed. The breath went out of Witness in a tidy, unpanicked way. The body remembered a last clench. The head sagged. The mouth finished its smile, because that is what mouths do when they have work left and nothing to do it with. Silence settled. It was not peace. It was the space where an answer had been made, and had not yet learned all the meanings of itself. "Reduce," Melchizedek said. Ramiel lifted the body in his hands, with the same care he would have used for a brother. Not tenderness, precision. He carried it through the bronze grill to the chapel beyond. The brazier received what it was given without ceremony. Pungent smoke rose, not cruel, heavy with oils and the odd sweetness of marrow. Ephraim leaned his weight on his rifle and began a chant that had been taught to him for funerals, and which he offered now to an enemy, because the words did not know the difference, and ought not to. Abriath watched the smoke, and told himself how air moves in rooms, how ash falls. Old habits kept his hands still. In his head he wrote star lines from a name to a point none of them could yet see. Melchizedek set his Crozius upright on the floor, both hands around the haft, forehead against the grip. "Zephynis," he said without lifting his eyes. It was not a prayer, it was a report. The watcher had come to rest beside the altar. It stared with its blank underhood face at the dent in the prisoner's helm that no longer needed a head. It put out a hand, as if to touch the air over the metal, and then decided against it, and drew the hand back under its folds. The smoke thinned. Ash settled. On the lip of the brazier, where blood had boiled and dried like lacquer, something had been dragged. Not by fingers, by the last stubbornness of a hand that had not quite consented to stop meaning. A word scratched itself on that black lip and lay there raw. Vardath. The letters were crooked. The ash clung in them. A breath would have blown them away. None of them breathed for 3 beats. Dominiel looked at Melchizedek. Melchizedek looked at the word. He nodded once and made the sign that means we have what we came for, and we will pay for it later. "Abriath," the chaplain said. "I have it," Abriath replied, and it did not sound like a boast or a reassurance. It sounded like a pin driven into a chart. Varicon glanced at his wounded, read each man's stance, and accepted that for a little while longer cartilage and stubbornness would do the work of ligaments. He touched the banner's strap with his knuckles, where Malvin had bound it, and felt leather that had been cut from a living man's harness only hours ago. The emerald vow would stand for another hour. It would stand for as many as were left. Lutharion stooped, picked up the ruined helm that Zephynis had dented with his fist, and set it on the floor at the foot of the altar with a neatness that meant 2 things. We keep trophies, and we keep lessons. "Bring me the chart room," Melchizedek said to the ship. He did not raise his voice. The Wrath knew whom he meant. The sanctum door unsealed. The room relearned the idea of corridors and men and work. Outside, bells began to speak to one another in long vowels through the ship's bones, the voice by which a battle barge remembers where it is and tells itself where it will be. Dominiel lingered one breath longer. He set his palm on Zephonis' helm and held it there until Heat said move. Trumpet, he said, and that was both farewell and a promise to use what he had been given. They filed out. The corridor waited, long and calm and lined with the patient faces of saints who had learned that their job was not to be believed, but to be seen. The Watcher came last, or perhaps had been there all along, and simply chose that moment to be noticed. As they moved, the ship changed the way it sang. Drive shrines took deep inhalations. Servitors on spined rails woke and began to write their ticks and numbers on long paper tongues. Somewhere in the bowels of the Wrath, a man rang a bell that had not been rung since a campaign whose name had been erased and replaced with a silence. In the strategium, light crawled up the edges of star plates like thought moving along the inside of a skull. The surface learned the shape of the perdition reach. A corner of the void darkened and then brightened again as it confessed to being interesting. Vardath appeared as a thin etched whisper on an old chart in a layer that had not been consulted in a long time. It was not on the fresh vellums. It was on the parchments that smelt of vinegar and oath wax and the particular dust that comes from forgotten confidence. Melchizedek stood at the edge of the plate with his Crozius grounded, hands resting on it as if on a rail. The oath-bound ranged behind him. The vow took their stations with the stiffness of men who will allow pain to be a fact later. Tech adepts unhooded lenses, muttered to the Wrath, and the Wrath answered by nodding in metal and letting its mass adjust to new thoughts. Say it, Melchizedek instructed Abriath, because saying locks a thing upright. Vardath, Abriath said. His voice was quiet and made the letters on the old chart look like they had always been waiting for that sound to set them level. Rimward of the Reach, 6 days in good wake. A beacon, a ruin with a throat. We follow the broken note. Dominiel's gaze did not leave the mark. His hand found the haft of Mortalis. It felt heavier. Maybe that was exhaustion. Maybe that was oath. Varricon squared his shoulders and counted the brothers he still had and the brothers he did not. Numbers made better promises than rage. Ephra's chant across the sanctum corridor reached its end somewhere behind them and folded into a hush, which was not rest but a pause in which breath decides to continue. The servo skull from the interrogation bobbed in through a side hatch and took up a place above the chart like a small, patient planet. The incense it shed drew lines the eye could not follow, and yet the nose insisted they pointed there. Navigator, Melchizedek said. A robed, blind-eyed figure slid from a recess, rings clicking on the brass rail. The tides about the reach are thin, the navigator said in a voice like paper brushed by feathers. Thin does not mean safe. The beacon you name has been silent in the formal charts for 3 centuries. It is not silent, Melchizedek replied. It is merely speaking to the wrong audience. The navigator inclined his head, accepting the rebuke as information rather than insult. We will listen for it, he said. We will find the throat that sings. Then we go, Dominiel said. We go, Melchizedek agreed, and his voice made the ship say yes in steel. He looked from the chart to the oathbound, to the vow, and then to the empty space among them, where a certain height and breadth of man had stood this morning, and would not again. Make ready, he said. They turned away from the light of the plate and went to work, because work is what you do when losses have not yet learned to take their full shape. On the altar behind the grill, ash settled in the grooves of a word until air forgot to move, and the word looked carved. The Wrath bowed its vast head by a degree so small that numbers argued about it, and engines disagreed and then complied. The ship's spine creaked like an old warrior testing his back. In the sanctum, the brazier coughed a lascol into brightness. The watcher stood where it had been and made the peculiar shape with its hands that sometimes means amen and sometimes means count. It turned, and if its face had possessed eyes, they would have met Xiphone's helm for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat the whole of what had been bought and what would be spent passed between one who had never spoken and one who never would again. In the dark, the Crozius kept a little thoughtful light. It looked like a promise. It felt like a price. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 6, Scene 4, The Fallen Commander. Chapter 6, Scene 5 follows.